Summer blockbuster season is over, and a lot of movie fans are trading the big screen experience for smaller screens at home. But whether your screen of choice is your computer, tablet, phone, smart TV, or even your internet-enabled popcorn popper, Infosec wants to make sure that you secure your screen. That's why we've created the free Secure Your Screen Toolkit to produce and direct you and your employees during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The toolkit includes 1 training module and an assessment, 5 posters to hang on the walls of your screening room, 4 newsletter templates, 4 email templates, and an employee presentation so you can save the day by preventing your organization from ending up with a starring role in the next big hacker event. Make Infosec your best supporting hacker preventer. See what I did by going to infosecinstitute.com/free to download our free toolkit and help turn the next big hacker heist into a box office flop this October. Look, I'm not going to ask you why you have an internet-enabled popcorn popper. I know we all bought some weird stuff during lockdown, but I will ask you to learn to secure your screens and secure your devices by going to infosecinstitute.com/free. One more time, rule of threes, that's infosecinstitute.com/free. And now, lights, camera, take action. Let's start the show. Today on Cyberwork, my guest is Leslie Lynn Smith, National Executive Director for Get Cities. Now, Get Cities stands for Gender Equality in Tech Cities. Today's episode will move away from standard cybersecurity and IT insights in favor of a larger look at investment opportunities for tech startups and where and on who we spend our investment capital. Leslie is a multi-decade authority on state and citywide community investment initiatives with a lifelong passion for bringing people of marginalized races and genders to the table in fulfilling their tech business dreams. Leslie talks about bridging the gap from angel investor money to initial seed and why that space between the two can sink new startups, the slow, patient process of affecting change at the legislative level, and offers an accelerated way to make IT and cyber teams more inclusive and equitable. If you ever wanted to get involved with angel investing and helping young companies get off the ground, Leslie talks you through the process with no steps missed. Learn all about it today on Cyberwork. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week we talk with a different industry thought leader about cybersecurity trends, the way those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, while offering tips for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. So my guest today is Leslie Lynn Smith of Get Cities or GET Cities?
We say Get.
Get Cities. I saw Leslie at the Women Impact Tech event in Chicago a while back and knew immediately I wanted to have her on the show. So Leslie is the head of Get Cities, which stands for Gender Equity in Tech, I believe. And so we're going to talk about that as well as her previous roles, which were also involving funding and entrepreneurship and so forth, as well as her shirt indicates, empowering women and fighting racism and all the other awesome things that need to happen in cybersecurity tech and elsewhere. So Leslie, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to Cyberwork.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate it.
Oh, so I'm so excited to speak to you today because your career trajectory is a little bit different from many of our guests. So I talk to people that work primarily in IT and cybersecurity. You know, some of them are boots on the ground techs or CISOs or instructors and so forth. And I've had a few angel investors on and serial startup creators, but no one as deeply embedded in entrepreneurship-based business development. And in this case, often on a citywide scale. So let me start there. So I gave an abbreviated introduction to some of the highlights of your work, but tell me about your work in this area, especially your progression from you were originally with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and then you went to TechTown, which was a Detroit-based organization, and then Epicenter, which was in Georgia. Is that right?
No, Memphis, Tennessee.
Memphis, thank you. Yes, Memphis. And now to Get City. So what are some of the major accomplishments you had along the way? And considering how thoroughly embedded and essential you were in each role, what was it about the challenges offered with each new position that enticed you to keep moving to the next position?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for asking about my career, something I'm really excited about and proud of. And I think the easiest answer to why the progression is a sort of constant pursuit of discomfort, which leads me to a new learning. Sitting in the same space and doing the same things over again, I think can dull your senses to the new things that are possible in each of your roles. And that was certainly true as I moved through each of those roles. My role at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation really took a very macro perspective on the innovation economy across the state of Michigan. And I was responsible for elements of capital that fueled that economy, everywhere from direct investments into tech companies to investments into other funds across the state, managing that portfolio. And then a whole series of relationships across the state that were leading innovation, economic development efforts, predominantly based at research universities across the state. So a high and heavy focus on innovation and the translation of those innovations into the economy, which, as you said, sort of breed these entrepreneurial outcomes in our community. And a part of what I loved about my work at the MEDC was that sort of macro perspective, proximity to the governor and the legislature and all of the sort of strategies that were at play to advance a sort of robust economy in ways that are different from traditional economic development. But one of my great frustrations, candidly, was the distance between sort of decision and impact. Which is often true when you're sitting in the macro spaces, and particularly even more true at times when you're sitting in public sector organizations. No fault of their own, just the way they're structured with the sort of risk to reward construct and the constituencies at play. And so the draw to Tech Town really was a call for me to get closer to the work. I am a native Detroiter, born in 1967 in the city of Detroit, very deeply tied to the racial sort of despair and opportunity that exists there. And I think very keen to roles that I can play in advancing a fight against some of those systemic sort of racist structures. And being in Tech Town, which is a sort of city-centered accelerator, co-working space, and innovation hub for primarily technologies coming out of Wayne State University, I was able to really bring a lot of my sensibilities closer to the ground in Detroit, which I deeply appreciated. I also happened to be there during the crash of the autos, which was followed by a national recession and to this day, the nation's largest municipal bankruptcy, which was a brilliant time to live and learn about what a new emerging economy can look like in a place that had really been tied to all of the good, bad, and indifferent of an incumbent economy, which was so richly sort of representative in the automotive economy, which sort of precipitated the crash. So I think that's a pretty long answer to say MEDC was a great framing to understand the opportunity, and the move into city centers was an attempt to bring me closer to the actual impact.
Yeah, and then the move from there to Memphis with Epicenter, was that a similar thing? Did you feel like you had done what you could with Tech Town and you were ready to move on, or was it simply a different set of challenges that intrigued you?
Yeah, I think it was both of those things. I don't think we're ever done with our work, but I do think there are new creative, inspired minds that can come to the work with a different perspective and a new imagination for the challenges. I am grateful for the work in Detroit because I think I was able to sit in the middle of a challenge we had about building a new economy that was going to potentially exclude Black and Brown people, which would have been an abject failure of our efforts. And Tech Town and myself and our team were instrumental in ensuring that that conversation was a central element of the conversation. And a lot of what drew me to Memphis was the very notion that we could take what we learned in Detroit and apply it in another Black American city with hopefully the same amount of success when we were working to build an inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem and portfolio of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that was sort of moves into my next question there. As I was looking through past interviews with you, a strong component with TechTown and Epicenter, now Get Cities, is providing opportunities for more women and marginalized genders as well as people of color. And in doing so, to quote one of your interviews, we collaboratively create a culture ripe with opportunity for change and flood the community with resources, accountability, and transparency. And in this way, we can create real change. So can you talk about, I guess, from there to the move from Epicenter to the focus of Get Cities, in which you'll now be foregrounding the work of, as the name says, bringing gender equality or equity in tech? Has your approach specifically to the tech center required different strategies and approaches from your previous work? And also the fact that it's multi-city like that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. A part of what drew me to Get was the multi-city sort of orientation with a national framework upon which we could hang that work, but also really lift up a new narrative and research and policy initiatives that bring this conversation to the center of every conversation. Did it require a huge shift relative to the economic focus? No, because I think tech is ubiquitous. It's present in all that we do. And we think there's just such a significant opportunity to infuse equity, justice, and inclusion across the tech economy, which would then necessarily spread across the balance of the economy. But I would say one of the sort of larger complications, candidly, was a focus on gender first, whereas prior, my work had disproportionately oriented toward the filter of racial equity first and sort of gender equity secondarily, because as we know, the population of the US is predominantly women. I am a woman, I identify as a woman. And so that almost felt like an afterthought. So orienting gender first was a new prioritization of that bias for me. And there were a couple of opportunities that existed with that, which I thought were interesting. One that was obvious, we cannot, when we speak about gender efforts in our economy or society, singularly focus on white women. And often that is what happened. There is a long history of white feminism in the US that excludes Black and Brown and Indigenous women. And we have been committed since the very beginning that our work would be intersectional and would absolutely prioritize those most underestimated in the sort of population of women. So I think that's one differentiation that we are able to bring to the work, given my past efforts and experiences. One thing we didn't expect, though, where I think there's a huge opportunity for learning in this space is, as you referenced in the question, marginalized genders. So it's not only women who identify as marginalized relative to gender. And when we hung a shingle calling gendered technologists into our sphere, trans and non-binary people were also arriving in search of support. And we didn't, A, fully expect that, or B, find ourselves fully prepared to navigate the complexity of their lived experience. And then I will also say there's not a lot of data about their lived experience because there is so much fear and sort of abject hate right now sort of brewing in those systems that it is rare for members of that population to identify as such in data capture, or we just don't ask the question, right? Because we haven't sort of evolved to a place where we're seeking that information. So not only did we lack a lot of sort of qualitative insights about those lived experiences, we also lacked a lot of quantitative data about how many, how often, and where these technologists existed in our systems. And so a point of great learning for me and our team has been how to sort of build capacity and competency such that we don't screw it up, candidly, because our first rule of all work is first, do no harm. And we did not want to harm this population of people. And then second, really finding partners in this work who could thoughtfully lead us through those interventions and execute work on behalf of this mission.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, yeah, you're right. There's been a terrible acceleration of as more trans non-binary people have become visible. There's been an acceleration of hate, but there's also I've seen a great acceleration of people trying to bring themselves up to speed and as you say, like doing right by these groups of people and not wanting to make things worse, knowing how many people are actively trying to make things worse. And so it's good to hear that there's that awareness going on as well. So I want to go from the sort of macro to the micro because I still don't quite get a sense of how these types of accelerators work. So can you walk us through some of the procedures and resources that Get Cities provides? Like let's start by talking about what a woman or person of marginalized gender who has Get Cities representation in their town could engage with to start their work. And then maybe, I don't know how many towns Get Cities represents, but we can maybe also talk about the ways that people who don't have, that in their town could engage with your resources as well.
Yeah, that is a great question. And this work is always clear to the practitioner and unclear to the people we seek to serve. So I am grateful for the question and for being forced to answer the question. A part of our effort is really designed at the systemic level. So when we go into cities, even before we've selected a city, we have done an extraordinary amount of bench and interview research to understand what the conditions for marginalized genders are on the ground so that we can understand where our investments, expertise, and support can add real value. So, for instance, before Chicago was selected as our first city, we really wanted to understand Chicago, in pursuit of our KPI, which are really increasing the number of degrees awarded to women in science and technology sort of fields, the number of jobs, promotions, and sort of persistence among women, trans, and non-binary technologists within each of our ecosystems, and then the amount of capital awarded to marginalized genders leading tech startups in each of those ecosystems look like. And our goal in each of the cities were not to duplicate, replicate, or sort of compete with activities that were already occurring on the ground, but to hear from technologists, policymakers, practitioners about the things they thought were working, but also the things that they thought were not working or where gaps existed. So the first body of work that we execute is really this deep sort of listening research tour where we understand at a very granular level what is happening in the local ecosystems.
Gotcha.
And then the sort of second piece of that work is to co-design interventions that will solve for those gaps. So for instance, in Chicago, we saw a significant sort of valley of lost opportunity between pre-seed and seed investments. So we knew that women, trans and non-binary humans, were getting their sort of friends and family round and some sort of pre-seed angel money, but then they were sort of not making it through to seed round, which means that that's going to prevent them from getting to A, B, and C. And so we co-created a series of interventions specifically designed to solve for that issue. And we always do that with local partners because I've been a local practitioner my entire career. And one thing I know is most often the local practitioners know what they need to do and that lack the resources, time, or energy to sort of execute those things. So in all ways, we want to be additive and augmentative, and in no ways do we want to be competitive. And so that's our second layer of work, is to really run a bunch of experiments that we co-create in the community with our partners.
Okay.
And then third, we invest in the things that work at scale. So if we run 4 experiments and 3 of them really don't move the needle, but one of them is really changing the outcome for technologists in our market, we will additionally invest in that effort so that it can move at scale. And I think that's one thing that differentiates us. We're not designed to work directly with technologists other than to get our research and impact data. We're designed to work with organizations that are working with technologists and leave those organizations stronger, more focused on a comprehensive sort of equity construct, and then create accountability, right? So I think the final thing that we do is measure the impact of all of these efforts so that we can understand if they're working, why they're working, and we can talk about that sort of narrative shift in those ecosystems from one who was sort of underperforming to one that is actually moving closer to full potential.
Okay, now again, just so I can connect the threads in my head here, it sounds so you have sort of local people on the ground who maybe predate, Get Cities being in their city, who know the ecosystem and know where the gaps are, like you say. And so you're coming in and saying, hey, we're Get Cities, and you get in touch with those people and say, okay, what does Chicago need? What does Baton Rouge need, whatever, and then they tell you, and then so I guess I'm trying to understand. So it's not so much that you like hang a shingle in a town and say, everyone come on in and we'll talk about it. It's more like you're sort of moving into sort of existing stories or scenarios or things, and you're providing help in that way. Is that sort of on the right track?
It is. I think while we hang a shingle, it's more about bringing the sensibility, accountability, and resources to gender equity.
Yes.
And often in markets, we will hear things like, we weren't focused on this. We'd never gotten in a room together. We didn't know we could collaborate.
Yes.
We couldn't find resources. So we're trying to just make each system better than when we found it. And by better, in our instance, we mean serving more women, trans, and non-binary humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so yeah, we've been talking for several years now about on this show about the importance of bringing women and LGBTQIA people and BIPOC professionals and other IT and cybersecurity professionals with wide variances in physical ability and neurodiversity and economic and social background into the forefront of the industry, not just as a checkmark on HR's DEI reporting, but as a way to bring new perspectives to problem solving, new approaches to the work environment, new ways to interface with the community. And so that's why I'm always, so glad to talk with someone that engages in this work so directly, because it's hard not to speak about these things, in the abstract sometimes. So, for example, I've talked with so many people who are rightly frustrated with the slowness of the process in gender, racial, and economic equity within IT and cyber. So we go over the usual complaints on the show so many times. Hiring managers write their job descriptions poorly, or asking for qualifications that look good but aren't needed, or what have you. Or they don't hire they just hire the first person that makes them feel comfortable in an interview, or limit their candidate search to a standard job fair and standard college campuses. So, we know the issues and we can rattle them off by rote, but getting to ways to solving these problems systemically becomes a bigger issue. And so one of your interviews, you said, quote, I find ecosystems are so convinced that they are sitting in a scarce environment that there's this sort of natural competitiveness, but that doesn't serve the work, right? So if we keep women and other marginalized genders at the center of every decision we make, and we partner with purpose to advance that cause and eliminate any innate concerns about credit and control, the partnerships get a lot more obvious and honest. So can you speak to some of these concrete ways, Leslie, that you've utilized yourself to work towards gender equality in tech? Is there a way to move beyond reiterating the complaints and to making the changes yourself?
That is a mouthful, and that's the biggest question, right?
Yeah.
It's the biggest question we face as a society. And I've spent my entire economic development career focused on that very question. And I have a lot of answers, but I'll try to be concise. One, we regularly are asking the oppressed to beg freedom from the oppressor. So these systems are built in a way that advantages the majority, which is predominantly cis white men. And every bit of advice that we give or rote, memorized sort of concern we have that you just rattled off really speaks to the good nature or willingness of this majority to allow us in. Right. And we hope they're going to do that because they want to. And what we find over and over, and you referred to this earlier, a lot of times these DEI goals are checkboxes. Many times we find they're performative without any real measurable infrastructure to actually change the outcomes. And then what we're seeing increasingly post-COVID is that those who did bother to change the sort of pipeline decisioning to bring new technologists into their organizations at the lowest levels of sort of employment are the first to go. So if we know that the goal is to get these sort of marginalized or underestimated populations into positions of leadership and decisioning and influence, that becomes really impossible when every time the box has been checked, the first time there's a shrinking in the economy, they're the first to be eliminated. And we see that sort of over and over and over again. So there are a couple of philosophies that we bring to the work that I think are really important. First of all, we can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And that's how a lot of this work is done.
Yep.
Second of all, there are advantages in the current system that prevent the people benefiting from it from changing their behaviors, right? So they're doing just fine. And so we believe there are a variety of ways to sort of stop doing the same thing and start hopefully getting different outcomes. And those have to do with less with emotional conversations about doing the right thing and more with data-driven, business imperative conversations where diversity of humans across a business consistently and sort of undeniably perform better. So sort of sharing that story. And then second, really creating a policy framework that enables access for marginalized humans. And that can be everything from childcare and elder care to policies that require accessibility issues be handled, that require language accessibility to be honored, to policy that requires certain allocations of opportunities to underrepresented populations. And that's true with government contracts at the federal, state, and local levels. That can be true for venture-backed companies and private sector companies. And we believe that once you create that sort of policy expectation, behaviors start to change. There are also policies in place that bar participation. And we see that particularly in venture capital, where many folks from marginalized backgrounds are barred from access to capital or distribution of capital because of the way certain policies are written that prevent them from participating based on either generational wealth, current sort of access to wealth, and or sort of consumer protections that maybe overprotect and then under allow people the access to build more wealth. So we think policy and research are really an important part of changing the expectations. And then the other really sort of radically effective approach we've seen is through the development of sponsors, understanding about what sponsorship looks like rather than mentorship. And mentorship is, I can tell you how to be a great technologist. Sponsorship is, I'm going to talk about you in every room I enter and say, you should hire this human, you should promote this human, and really using the voice that I have in every room I enter to lift up marginalized technologists into the conversation. So one thing we're trying to do at scale is build more sponsors. How can we just convert more and more majority technologists or leaders into sponsors for marginalized humans? The second thing where we've seen an extraordinary amount of success is when incentives are directly tied to just and inclusive outcomes. So in company A, I say, hey, Chris, I would really love if you had more women, people of color, neurodivergent, and LGBTQIA humans on your team. And you say, great, I'll see what I can do. And then you continue to do everything you've always done. And at the end of the year, your team looks exactly as it did when you started. A better option is to say, Chris, we would like you to expand the diversity on your team to include 5% of this population, 12% of this population, 20% of this population, and your compensation, bonus, and promotions are tied to those outcomes. And the minute that happens, we see that solving for all of those problems, there isn't a pipeline, I can't find them, we don't know where they are, suddenly get solved in a very different way.
Yeah.
So policy and incentives, we think, are really the most appropriate way to break ourselves out of these constant sort of broken commitments.
Yep.
And just avoiding the whole shame and blame game. We're not here to say, y'all constructed this system that uniquely sort of overserves you and underserves other humans.
Yep.
But what we are asking is to acknowledge that's true and sort of work with us to build a better outcome, because as they say in the work, this isn't pie, right? Like justice for all of us doesn't mean less for you.
Yeah, right.
There is really enough to go around.
Yeah. No, I love all that. There's two things that stick out for me there. One is, you hear about, well, why, when the Great Lakes were on fire in the 70s, and why are they cleaner now? It's like, well, because people behind the scenes were doing the sort of grinding work of like, winding up environmental protections and stuff. And you forget about that. It's not always like some big ta-da thing happens and suddenly it all slots into place. It just, it's always sort of you're just building these little sort of steps upward. And I also like both the aspect of tying compensation, promotion, and bonus and whatever to these outcomes, but also the specificity of it. I want 5% from this community and this community. As someone with ADHD, I know that sometimes if I'm given a big task like find more of this or do more of this without specificity, like it is going to be like way harder to do that, or to know when you've done it correctly or when you've done enough of it and stuff. So I like, it's always, it's a number of things, and I'm certainly not letting anyone off the hook, but I like all of those different pieces of the puzzle, because like I said, I've not heard that many people give those kind of concrete sort of examples. So, so I saw some info about a presentation you gave once, and it's the title of it was on womentech.net. The presentation was titled "The Spoof of Imposter Syndrome and How This Pathology Has Been Gaslighting Women in the Workplace for Decades." So I love that, because it's a bit of an inversion on what we usually hear about imposter syndrome. Can you tell me more about this revised and refined discussion around imposter syndrome, especially among women?
Yeah, you made me laugh when you asked that question. We have been told forever that we don't belong, and it's bullshit.
Yeah,
we do belong. And so we believed the story we were told, that we didn't belong, we didn't have things to offer, we didn't have new ideas, we didn't have the capacity to lead, we couldn't navigate managing a family and managing a job. And so over time, we've really onboarded that message as true. And when we find ourselves in rooms that we've been told we don't belong in, we feel like we don't belong.
Yeah.
And my message to women is we do belong. We've always belonged. And let's stop making ourselves feel bad or allowing ourselves to be convinced we don't belong there, because that's what we've always been told. And I have heard colleagues, peers, friends, team members, bosses sort of repeat this. I'm really suffering from imposter syndrome. And I'm like, first of all, who are we trying to be? One, we're just trying to be strong, smart, influential, joyful, satisfied, loving, gracious, generous, kind, executive humans. And we're not faking that. That's happening.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, the people that told us we weren't that don't get to tell us that. We get to decide the story ourselves. And so I just really encourage women to stop buying all of the nonsense we've been sold, because it slows us down, and that it makes us feel that we're not worthy or we're not valued. And there are enough things in the system that will tell us that. our pay differential, our promotion differential, our presence in the C-suite. And all of those things are enough to combat, let alone this sort of emotional baggage that inherently we're not as good. And I just think it's nonsense. And so I want to change the conversation.
Yeah, I like that also because I think of, when people say imposter syndrome, they give it this sort of value neutral sort of component that it's like, well, what can you do? It's just imposter syndrome. It's up here in your noggin, but I appreciate the explanation on that because it does show, some of the external clues that might not just be the way your brain is wired. So, all right. So, yeah, and just as a quick aside here, I'm so grateful to be able to host this podcast because I meet so many inspiring people who are working toward a more equitable future for so many. For example, I had a recent guest, Brianne Kaplan. She'll be on the feed in a couple of weeks here. She runs Code Your Dreams here in Chicago, and they bring coding skills and activities to underserved communities. Last week, I talked to Leslie Carhart, who does tireless work mentoring women and cyber professionals at all levels. And a while back, I talked to Mike Gentile, whose Cyber Forward program works with future professionals who have very unstable social or economic situations to help people whose lives have been beaten down to break through. So my question for you, Leslie, is where do you see the work needing still to be done? I mean, where are the gaps that can be filled? So like I say, I give endless credit to people like yourself and Brianne and Leslie C. and Mike and many others for being able to see the issues with clear eyes and go to work on the solution. But I know there's others who are overwhelmed or don't know where to start, or like I said, don't know how to break a problem down into smaller tasks. It makes a real difference. So do you have any advice for listeners who are currently in IT and cyber roles or studying to be, who want to start their careers in life with a giving mindset? Can you talk about some ways to build this type of helping hand into your day-to-day so you don't find yourself 20 years into a job saying like, oh, I'd like to help out, but I really don't know where to start with that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think to an individual level, it really is about first coming to understand the lived experiences of the people around you and the ways that they're different from you. I think sort of nationally, we've maybe lost the commitment or concern for just understanding each other a little bit better and acknowledging we don't all have to agree on everything, but we do coexist on this planet together. And so understanding how your ADHD affects the way you live in the world, or how my being a woman affects the way I live in the world, I think is a really important sort of first step as an individual. Like, meet some people who don't look like you or don't have the same sort of lived experience you do, and listen deeply, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable, and build some empathy for that. Because I think then when you're asked to do some of these other things that I would recommend, which is in the workforce, get involved in your ERGs. There are employee resource groups that exist in most companies. And while they sit in service to Black employees or LGBTQ or women or immigrants or first gen, they're open to everyone. And even the majority can participate if they're doing so with a willing heart and sort of mind to add value. So get involved and learn ways that you too can sort of measurably advance the plight of all humans in your work. And then the other thing I will say, like, policy really matters, and really understanding the policy frameworks. Like you said, cleaning up the Great Lakes wasn't an accident. It was an act of love and commitment and legislation and investment that existed over decades to get us to this overnight.
And a lot of losses on the way, and a lot of setbacks, and a lot of dusting yourself off and trying again and again and again. It's amazing.
It is amazing, which takes me to my fourth point, which is sort of pack your patience, right? We are not going to change inequitable systems in a single week or month, and we are going to have setbacks. I mean, we are living through an historic period of setback, challenges to Roe v. Wade, lawsuits against inclusive sort of construct. The SBA is being sued. Venture capitalists are being sued. We've got legislation against trans and non-binary humans just popping up in states all across the country. So we're in a place of great setback for access to a lot of rights and opportunities that previously existed. So also remember that we're in a long game. We must remain patient and committed. Take the setbacks, but don't sort of allow apathy to creep in and your sort of self to creep out. And then from a very real resource perspective, you can give time and money to places that are doing the things you care about, whatever it is. You care about gender equity in tech, you can invest in a bunch of our partners in a bunch of our different cities. You care about policy, you can invest in think tanks that are really advancing. Non sort of political, just like policy that you care about. You can put your money where your sort of mouth is. And then because I've supported entrepreneurs my entire career, I'm a serial entrepreneur myself, you can also invest in a wide array of entrepreneurs across your community who would love nothing more than your financial and intellectual investments. And that's not as hard to do as you would think. So find an angel group and invest in a startup.
All right. That sounds, it sounds easy, but it doesn't sound easy enough. So tell me a little, give me a start, a basic intro for someone that says like, I got a couple $100 burning a hole in my pocket here, or even a couple $10, a couple $20, whatever. Like, where do you start? Like, what would you start if you wanted to do, because I know there's things like microfunding and all these kinds of things, and I don't really know all how, what are some things to look for in terms of like a good, angel investing company or a policy group that, how do you sort of fact check them to make sure that your money's going to be going to the right people?
Well, one thing you can do is reach out to us at getcities.org and we'll point you in the right direction and help you find your way to any number of our partners at P33 or 1871 or Chicago Blend or World Business Chicago or the YWCA or YMCA. There are a lot of community organizations that are connected to programs and individuals that need your financial support. So my sort of first recommendation is go to someone you trust and ask them to refer you. Look for in your communities, if you want to start angel investing, angel events. You can look on LinkedIn, and there are a lot of angel events in Chicago, and many of them are open to the public. And you can just go and listen. I've gone to a number of events in Chicago where there'll be really inspired conversations. There'll be entrepreneurs, there'll be fund managers, and the access to investment has gotten so much easier over the last 10 years that you can in many ways start with $100 or $1,000 or $500. And some of that is microfunding and some of that is angel funding. So come to Get Cities and we'll help connect you, or look at LinkedIn or Google or whatever for angel event opportunities in your community. And you're generally going to find your way there.
Do you have off the top of your head, like a list of all the cities that Get Cities is currently operating in?
We're in 3 cities. We're in Chicago, Miami, and DC.
Cool.
And have a sort of collaborative exchange and partnership with each of those cities. And then we have conversations with other cities across the country to share what we're learning and doing, because there aren't enough of us to get this done as fast as we need to get it done.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if if you're planning on opening in any other cities, or more to the point, if you're in another city and want Get Cities help or resources, are like, how do you you just reach out to you and you'll sort of tell them what the local equivalent is or whatever?
Yeah, we'll absolutely help them navigate that, point them in the direction of best practices. We're going to issue at the end of this year a series of lessons learned and best practices for ecosystem work like that, which we've done because we really want to open source our learnings to help achieve gender and racial equity at a far more rapid pace than the one we're currently on. Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up today, can you sort of give us some of Get Cities' big initiatives for the rest of the year going into 2024? Are there certain areas of focus or things that you're working on that you're especially excited and eager to tell everyone about?
Yeah, I mean, in all of our cities, we continue to run experiments on gap filling initiatives to see what's working and what's not working. And so we'll continue to do that. And we're excited about that because it brings new energy to each of our ecosystems. But one of the programs we're terribly proud of is our Champions program, which started in DC, has now scaled to Miami, is tripling in size in its next iteration. And it's really all about bringing industry leadership to the table and building more sponsors. It is disproportionately occupied by cis white men who are committed to changing the outcomes in measurable and meaningful ways. And our hope is to continue to expand that nationally such that we get a pickup of all of these humans who are willing, like you indicated, you are, but really need measurable, committed sort of goals and processes. And we try to really infuse that through these cohorts. So that cohort will start again in the new year. And we're super excited about that. In Chicago, we are doing so much work in the venture space and really getting more diverse venture capitalists trained. So we work with Chicago Blend on a Venture Fellows program, which has recently been awarded a national award from the National Venture Capital Association and is receiving additional funding to train more emerging venture capitalists. We know that the sort of selection bias is in our favor toward equity when venture capitalists look more like the people we want to invest in. So we're trying to work on that side, and we're very excited about the next cohort there and love our partnership with Chicago Blend. And then on the seed founder side, which I talked to you about, we in P33 are launching a whole variety of interventions this year to continue to see capital flow to these marginalized technologists. So a lot going on. Continue to live and learn, but please check us out. We'd love to help anyone who's listening get involved.
All right. Well, one last question for all the beans here. If our listeners want to know more about Leslie Lynn Smith or Get Cities, where should they go online?
So getcities.org is our website. We're on all the social channels, just like everyone in the world, all the usual suspects. I'm also on all of the socials. My LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to get me. I check that inbox on a regular basis. That's how you and I got connected. So we're proof that it works. I'm also active on Twitter, and you can find me there, usually sharing blogs or insights. I write a Medium post, and I'm on the Forbes Business Council. So I issue sort of thought pieces about once a month.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much for taking us on this incredible journey. It was a real pleasure to meet and talk with you.
Thank you. I really loved being here. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad. And thank you, as always, to all of you who've been listening to and watching the Cyberwork podcast. We just keep getting more and more subscribers, and we really appreciate you, every one of you. So before you go, I want to invite you all to visit infosecinstitute.com/free to get a whole bunch of free stuff for Cyberwork listeners, including our new cyber security awareness training series, Work Bites, a live action series featuring a host of fantastical employees, including a zombie, a vampire, a princess, and a pirate, making security mistakes and hopefully learning from them. We also have our free cybersecurity talent development ebook. It's got in-depth training plans for the 12 most common roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy manager, secure coder, and more. And we also will have a new toolkit up. I think there's a promo at the beginning of this called Secure Your Screens. It's movie themed. I did a promo for it. It's super cool. Lots to see, lots to do. Once you get to infosecinstitute.com/free, you can check it all out. And yes, it's in the description below. Thanks once again to Leslie Lynn Smith and Get Cities. And thank you all so much for watching and listening. And as always, we'll speak to you next week. Bye now.